Welcome. This is Shamtoli Haq with Law Plus Liberation. Today, we're very excited to have with us Farah Diaz-Tello, who is the Senior Counsel and Legal Director for If, When, How. Farah has also worked at National Advocates for Pregnant Women, currently called Pregnancy Justice, where she established and led programs in human rights and birth justice. She's also written publications, scholarly and popular, on the criminalization of pregnancy, economic coercion and childbirth, obstetric violence, and reproductive justice issues in popular culture. So we're very excited to have Farah with us to talk to us and to educate us a little bit more about the field of reproductive justice. Before we jump into that area, could you tell us a little bit about how you entered into social justice movement lawyering work?
So I think my story begins when I was an undergraduate in Texas. I grew up in Texas. Being a Texan is an important part of my identity. And I would say that my friends and I were reproductive health hobbyists. It was empowering to have information about our bodies and, reproduction and sexuality and to really feel in control of that. And I think a lot of my experiences of receiving reproductive health care were affirming and empowering. Some were not. That was interesting too. So I think that I knew at that point that I wanted to do something that had to do with gender justice and the law. I took a class with Sarah Weddington, who argued Roe v. Wade, and was teaching at the University of Texas on sex equality, and felt really, I think, called to the law as a practice. I think it's probably because I'm a grown-up theater kid, and the law is really about storytelling and human drama. And so these were the questions that really like fascinated me and animated me. So I decided that I would come to New York because I wanted to do international human rights work. And I came to the CUNY Law School because of the clinic there, and which at the time was led by Rhonda Copeland. And this was somebody who I really saw as a mentor figure and a really a titan in the movement for gender justice and human rights. And not very long after I arrived at law school, I became pregnant. I carried that pregnancy to term, and my experience of receiving pregnancy-related care was so at the time I was a Medicaid recipient. I was a student, living in this period of temporary poverty, and I really had the experience of seeing what it was like to receive care that wasn't empowering, that wasn't supportive, that was disrespectful in so many ways, and then also fighting to get care that was respectful. I'm fortunate that New York Medicaid covers midwifery services, so I found a midwife who unfortunately recently passed away. Joan Bryson is an incredible person and a real, I think, leader in the field. And I think, seeing the contrast was incredibly striking to me. And then all of this process culminated in a birth experience that was traumatizing and disempowering at the hands of people that I was trusting to provide care. And, people who were reputed to be very supportive. St. Vincent's Hospital, which was, a storied hospital that closed down more than a decade ago, I guess, at this point. And I think, in the aftermath of that, sort of sorting through the rubble of what had happened and thinking like, I'm a law student. I have this education. I'm somebody who sees myself as empowered and wanting to be a voice for justice and equality. And this is what the experience was like. What is it like for other people who look like me, who are not carrying the same privileges that I am, for people who don't have the stamina or the time or the health literacy to be able to be arguing with Medicaid and fighting for respectful care. And I think what that really did was open my eyes to the fact that, we are so singularly focused on the question of whether to bear and beget a child, right? Like that's the language that Roe used. And it meant that we were really sort of overlooking these other big questions of how our society treats people once they're beyond that point and are carrying a pregnancy to term, and are we providing them with the care they need? Do they have the supports they need? And fundamentally, do they even have the right to make decisions about their bodies and their lives once they've decided that they're going to carry a pregnancy? So being a person who had a lot of reproductive experiences that didn't fit within sort of like the normative framework of like what people are supposed to do, or whether they're supposed to acquiesce to medical advice, or what types of decisions are they supposed to make at what points in their lives. um I don't know, that was a sort of like through the looking glass moment for me. And I was very lucky at that time to then be introduced to the reproductive justice framework as a way of thinking about this. And then it's sort of, then it made it all make sense. So I think, I would say I felt called to the law. There was a point in my life when I wanted to be a midwife. That was the first thing I ever wanted to be when I grew up, was a midwife. I think the world is lucky that I realized that my calling was to the law and not to midwifery, because I lacked the patience and the constitution to do that. But the work that I'm doing, I like to say, it's as close as I could get to that work of holding people in their reproductive lives, with the skill and the quirks that I was put into this world with. So that was my path, and I feel extremely fortunate that I have gotten to do that work for the entire course of my legal career. That's something that not everybody has the opportunity to say, and I've been doing it with amazing colleagues, amazing partners in movement, and incredible mentors and people who've taught me along the way.
Great, thank you so much. And we're going to get to that work. And I just wanted to emphasize, a couple of things that you said that I think could be a episode in itself. Excuse me, in terms of storytelling and law and gender justice. And so we'll maybe return to that, but also how your own direct experience informs your advocacy. And I think that's something that's been a very core tenet of our platform, which is that those directly impacted have kind of the knowledge and expertise to really address the issues. And you come at it from these twin lens of having some direct experience and then also as a legal advocate. So let's start with some definitions. Law Plus Liberation is a public education program. So, what is reproductive justice? How does If, When, How define reproductive justice? And what principles guide your approach to law and advocacy?
Yeah. So, well, I should start by saying, if, when, how doesn't define reproductive justice. That definition comes to us from the people who founded that movement, and that legacy is held by Sister Song. So when we talk about reproductive justice, what we mean is people's ability to make decisions about their reproductive lives, which include the right to become pregnant and bear a child, to not be pregnant, and to raise the children that we give birth to in safety and dignity, in safe communities. And so we really see our work as being in service of reproductive justice, in service of those ends, because reproductive justice is not just a philosophical framework, it's also a practice of community organizing and of mobilization. And our work, we like to say our work is in courts, capitals, and communities. So we do, the work of organizing among the legal profession, but fundamentally our work is about using the law and changing the law to advance the ends of reproductive justice. And yeah, we bring to that many core principles, including, an explicitly anti-racist lens that opposes punitive state systems. It calls for the abolition of state systems that cause violence in people's reproductive lives. Working in solidarity with other movements and within the reproductive movements. So not just reproductive justice, but reproductive rights and reproductive health. And I think we see our work as being as clearing a pathway for the people who are doing the important work of culture shift and of these things that make wins in the courtroom or wins in the Capitol sustained, right? Because I think one of the hard lessons of Roe versus Wade was that a victory in the courtroom is something that can be erased. At I would say at the drop of a hat, but really, over the course of many decades of concerted effort on the part of opposition. But those wins are ephemeral if we don't also change culture along the way. And that's culture change is not necessarily the work of lawyers. I think that it, certainly is incumbent upon us to change culture among, change the culture of lawyering, change the culture of legal education, so that those things better serve human need. But yeah, I see our job as being to clear the path.
You used the word gender justice earlier. How is gender justice related to or different from reproductive justice? And why not use the word reproductive rights? What does the justice add in that terminology? So again, for us to define these terms so that those listening can understand it in relationship what they may hear in like more mainstream conversation.
Yeah. So I think the simplest distillation of what reproductive justice is, I feel like I saw Loretta Ross write this on a chalkboard one time. Reproductive rights plus social justice equals reproductive justice. And in sort of its most basic form, the idea that people should indeed have a right under the law to make decisions about their bodies, whether that's to access contraception or to become pregnant or to end a pregnancy. All of these things, these legal rights are important, but legal rights are impossible without the conditions in which people can actually exercise those rights. So that is, includes access, in fact, to services. It includes the ability to be able to live in dignity, like in dignified conditions where people have access to food and water and medication and all of the basic necessities of life. Their ability to participate in the political system, right? Because those rights really rely on the ability of people to continue to speak for them and advocate. And so all of these things are intertwined. We can't just take the reproductive rights and expect that they're going to be able to persist and be sustained without all of these other conditions. And fundamentally, that's a human rights perspective, right? Like we have the concept that like human rights are they're interconnected, they're indivisible, right? And you can't separate out, say, people's political rights from their economic and social rights because the one depends on the other. And so I think reproductive justice really recognizes that. And when I talk about gender justice, I think we take a perspective on that is holistic, that like everybody, irrespective of their sex or their gender identity, deserve to be able to make decisions about their bodies. I like to say that everybody has a reproductive life, whether that is that is avoiding pregnancy or having become pregnant or supported a loved one or a partner through a pregnancy. And so these things, even though not everybody has the capacity for pregnancy. Like that is not the sort of the be all and end all of what it means to do reproductive justice and to do gender justice. It's about people's ability to make these decisions on equal footing with everybody else and not have those rights abridged because of who they are, how they present to the world.
I'm grateful for you to mention Rhonda Copeland, Loretta Ross as sort of legacy organizers and Sister Song for the definition, because so much of our work is really, kind of a continuity. I wanted to now turn to the current legal landscape. You mentioned Roe being overturned, and what's the current legal landscape post Dobbs? What do you see as the most pressing issue or challenges facing the reproductive justice movement right now, either legally and politically?
Yeah. Whew.
I know
I feel
it's a
like I
big
need to take
one.
a deep breath for that one. Yeah, I mean, so the primary characteristic of the post-Dobbs landscape is that it is fractured. And what that means in practical terms, because I like to center our work on the lives of real people, like that is the thing that is most important to us is individual human need as opposed to the sort of broader legal principles, which certainly are important. But what that means for real people living their lives in communities is that depending on where you are in the country, you may not be able to access the abortion care that you need. Roe certainly was never enough to guarantee access for all people, but the way in which that question now of what people are to do if they find themselves pregnant is so fraught, and it really varies based on where people live. I think that the Dobbs decision and the subsequent polarization, where some states rushed to try to protect reproductive rights and some states rushed to try to uh, criminalize abortion and impose all sorts of penalties on providers. The like the upshot of that means that like people are left in fear and confusion and often feel like they have nowhere to turn, and that's by design. I feel like these states are really telling people, you have nowhere to turn. I think one of the things that we've seen is an intensification in the targeting of people who do abortion support work. So people who run abortion funds or run practical support networks that help people access abortion care. And by targeting those, states are sending a very clear message to say, well, we may not be able to criminalize you, the individual abortion seeker. We may not be politically palatable for us to pass a law that actually says that, but we're going to cut you off from support. We're going to threaten the people that love and care for you, the community activists who want to support you. We're going to threaten them with $1 million lawsuits. We're going to threaten them with criminalization. And so you have nowhere to turn. And in a way, that is an echo of abuser tactics, right? Like one of the things that abusers in intimate partner violence situations do is isolate people from anybody who could support them. So essentially, what we're seeing on a mass scale in so many states is state violence that is very intentional, very abusive to individuals, and cutting them off from care. So, that's the landscape that we see, and it is very different. It's very different for me sitting in New York than it is for my sister who's sitting in Texas, right? Like that is, and the fact that people have to contend with that. So many millions of people are now in these situations where, the state is saying you have nowhere to turn. Yeah, it's a terrifying time, I think, to be doing this work. Um, by the same token, it is a time where a lot of people and a lot of groups have really stepped into courage to support people through this. And I'm glad to be a part of that. I'm very proud of the work that our Repro Legal Helpline does to help people understand their rights and the risks they might face and connect them to legal support and be fighting for them every day. Our Repro Legal Defense Fund, helping actually get people out of jails and support them through their defenses. Um, yeah, so in a time of a terrifying landscape, it is a heart balm to be working with people who are doing incredible work that are meeting the needs that the state has created through its violent actions.
Thank you for that frame of looking at the state retaliation and state violence kind of through the lens of like, domestic abuse, because we see that tactic used in other areas, criminalizing immigrant rights supporters or other, that seems to be like the sort of way by which, activists are being penalized, but having this sort of feminist lens to the work, I think is really helpful for others. You began to talk about your current projects at If When How, the hotline, the defense fund. Can you tell us, what exactly does your organization do? What are the ways in which, you talk about lawyering for reproductive justice? What does that look like?
Yeah, so we use direct legal services and strategic advocacy to create a future where all of us has the power and support to make decisions about our bodies and our families and our communities without barriers or coercion or punishment. And what that means is that we use the tools of lawyering to try to create change on a variety of different timescales. So we are working simultaneously to change laws and to change lives. So as I mentioned, we have direct legal service programs that work with people who are in immediate crisis. So the Repro Legal Helpline, the Repro Legal Defense Fund. We have a litigation team that does criminal defense of people who are experiencing criminalization because of an abortion or another pregnancy outcome. And so those things are really, these are interventions that are tailored for somebody who is in immediate crisis. And also, I mean, I think in terms of our litigation, geared at law change, also ensuring that we leave the law better for the next person who comes behind, right? But then it's not enough to just intervene in the moment of crisis. We also want to create legal change. So we do policy advocacy to support to ensure that people don't find themselves in these situations in the first place. So, dismantling the laws and the legal structures that allow state violence in people's reproductive lives to persist, whether that is repealing laws that criminalize self-managing an abortion or disentangling criminal investigation processes from the health system, right? So we want to change the law that way. We also do applied research to help equip power holders within systems to interrupt state violence wherever they can. We do a lot of work training healthcare providers in particular who encounter pregnant people in their work on what their responsibilities are with respect to mandatory reporting and their obligations to keep patients safe from invasive law enforcement actions or other things that might threaten their health, right? Um, and then on top of all that, we are trying to create change on an even longer time scale by building a network of attorneys and advocates across states who can step in when these things happen, right? Because these instances of state violence in people's reproductive lives can happen anywhere. It's not just a red state problem. It's something that can happen anywhere. And so it's important for us to be training lawyers and training law students on how they can respond and what actions they can take to further advance reproductive justice. So we're, wanting to intervene in the immediate moment, but then also create a better future in which everybody can freely make decisions about their reproductive lives without punishment or coercion and with dignity.
Is there a current litigation or campaign that you're working on that exemplifies sort of your lawyering model or something that you'd want to maybe uplift for or spotlight for folks to learn about?
Yeah. So an area of work or body of work that I would highlight that we're really focused on in 2026 and for the foreseeable future is something that we refer to as dignity and pregnancy loss.
Mm,
And where this came from was, over the course of the last couple of years since Dobbs, we have seen a shift in criminalization, a sort of criminalization 2.0,
mm,
that comes from the fact that we have, fortunately, in many ways, been successful in getting rid of laws that criminalize people for ending their own pregnancies. And so, as we've had those successes on the policy front, and as states, even abortion hostile states, have created more protections for abortion seekers that says they are not subject to criminal penalty under states' abortion laws, we've
mm.
seen prosecutors in response shift towards criminalizing people for what happens after they experience an abortion or a pregnancy loss. And so charging people with crimes related to related to their disposition of fetal remains. And so this comes from the fact that more people are self-managing abortions, more people are accessing abortion care through telemedicine. and through shield law providers. And so there are more situations in which people are confronted with the question of what are they supposed to do with the remains of a pregnancy once it's over. And, unfortunately, the response on the part of many states has been to criminalize people irrespective of what they do, whether they, privately dispose of remains on their own property through burial, whether they bring them with them to a healthcare facility, whether they, essentially whatever they do, if they dispose of them in the trash. We've seen people criminalized in all of those instances. And so now we're at a point where the bulk of our cases really are not about the state saying, the state sort of admits, okay, we can't charge you with a crime for having ended the pregnancy, but we're going to say that it is a criminal act for you to have buried the remains on your property. And then using old laws dredged from antiquity, laws that prohibit concealing birth, for example. These are laws that started in the 1700s to punish out of wedlock births.
Mm.
Laws that criminalize abuse of a corpse, which are laws that were, laws of general applicability that prohibit desecration of human remains, and saying that that people's essentially anything that a person does with fetal remains is abusive. And I think what it shows us is that it was never really about the law and lawfulness. It's really about using criminalization as a way to enact stigma, right? And to sort of perform stigma and say, we're going to find something to charge you with, irrespective of what the law says. Um, and so, we have seen this in the cases that we're litigating. This is something that we've observed in our research. We do mixed methods research looking at cases and what are the trends and the types of charges and where do they arise, to try to understand what the interruption points for criminalization are. And, building on recent victories around creating laws that protect people's ability to make decisions about their pregnancies. What we really wanted to turn towards was how, okay, this is about decriminalization, certainly, but it is also about a bigger, more fundamental principle that people are being robbed of the dignity of grief in these situations. And, very frequently in among our clients, it's somebody who had a wanted pregnancy or maybe didn't know that they were pregnant. And so it's not even for them about abortion. It is about the fact that instead of being treated with compassion and care, they were treated with stigma and punishment.
Mm.
So what this work entails is, in the first instance, ensuring that people aren't criminalized. If that means, repealing laws that are antiquated laws against concealing birth, whatever. Like, as a baseline, reproductive justice can't exist when people are criminalized for the outcomes of that pregnancy. That is just, that, those things are incompatible.
Mm.
But another aspect of this work that I think is really important to us is that this work is led by our state partners. And so, our model, even though we're a national organization, is not to parachute in and say, we know what is best for your state, but rather to build deep relationships with state advocates and say, okay, we want to support dignity in pregnancy loss. We know a lot about this criminalization piece from our years of working on these cases, but what else does it mean in your state for people to have dignity in pregnancy loss? And so, one bill that we recently helped pass in Washington State included a repeal of the concealing birth crime, and it included removing automatic jurisdiction for coroners over people's stillbirths and pregnancy losses, because that was a place too where the insertion of a coroner then essentially turned a medical issue into a criminal investigation. But then also we heard from advocates there who said, we have people who are losing pregnancies when they're in correctional facilities, and those, we just don't have information about this. And without information, how can we hope to change the circumstances in which people, we're incarcerating people during medically vulnerable time in their lives. The very barest minimum that the state can do is tell us what is going on. And so it also required tracking of adverse pregnancy outcomes in state and federal correctional facilities as a first step. I mean, I think as a first step, hopefully, to decarcerating pregnant people and decarcerating people generally. But this was something that was important to state partners. And so Our model is really one that's predicated on helping folks in states build the future of reproductive justice that they want. So that is our work around dignity and pregnancy loss. That it started the seed of it came from our experience defending people in court against bunk charges for their pregnancy losses, and now I think is something that helps us envision with our state partners an affirmative and supportive future that they want.
Thank you for sharing that. That relates to questions I wanted to ask about your model of working in coalition, and you talked about that with coalitional partners. So one question, maybe sort of lessons from your coalitional work, is how do you sustain trust and accountability in your work when, as a national organization is working with local partners, and then you also have individuals who are kind of impacted by these legal decisions. So how do you manage these different sort of interests and attention to the issue as a coalitional partner? So I think coalitional work is very difficult, and it's done well. It can be done well and not so well. What are some lessons that you've learned through your work that might be shared out?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the most important lesson is to bring humility and listening for what people really need. And that I think that is a place where national organizations frequently can go wrong. It is very easy to, say we're gonna come into states. We have a plan for what the state should look like, and we want to gather people who are going to help us effectuate our plan. I think that's exactly wrong. And we're very fortunate that so many of the folks who are on our policy team come from deep backgrounds of state-based work. So they know precisely how frustrating it is to have people, to have outsiders tell you what they think is best for your state. And so, we're one of our principles is we come where we're invited, right? We're not going to try to come into states and convince people that they need to, follow some blueprint that we've created, right? Like we are working to listen and to be good partners. And I think, standing with confidence in what we know we can offer, right? We know that we have a lot that we can offer our state partners and saying like, these are the things that we can share, and we can share our knowledge of what has worked or what has been difficult across states, right? Very often, I think we hear from state-based organizations who say, like, we just don't, we're putting out fires in our state all the time. We don't necessarily have like the time or capacity to be doing research into like, okay, this bill that is being presented to us has been presented in 5 other states, and like what were the tactics that those folks used. And so being able to serve as a clearinghouse for those things and make the connections also, because we have connections with folks in those 5 other states, right? Who we might be able to like put those together and really help help uh to support that ecosystem of advocates across states. So yeah, I mean, I think certainly there have been times when I may have come in with a preconceived notion of what something should look like, and and have had to do the difficult learning and like of also just like taking accountability for the places where I've been wrong. And I think the fact that we continue to have these relationships over time and across geography with folks, hopefully is testament to the fact that that people see that we are genuinely trying to do that work in ways that honor the expertise of the folks who are closest to the issue. If we're doing policy work, like they know the folks in the Capitol. They're there every single day. I am not, and I also, I'm as a Texan who has made my home in New York. I think I'm always very cognizant of the sort of coastal elite that and just the way that that really like it doesn't serve, frankly. And so like challenging that in myself and among other groups who are doing similar work at every chance I get.
Thank you. Reproductive justice, there's so many myths and misunderstanding in the general public. It's been a area that's been so polarized. Um, what are some misconceptions of this work that you think that would be important to kind of clarify? What narratives do you use to help shift the public's understanding around these issues?
Yeah. Um, Yeah, like with so many things, I think the greatest myth is the binary. I think that if you were to just listen to what is said on the news or, just what you hear like out in commentary and discourse, you would come away with a picture. There are two camps. And that, well, first of all, that you would come away with the notion that this issue is, begins and ends at abortion. Certainly, that is not the case. We know that as advocates for reproductive justice, right? But there are two camps and that it's like 50-50, and half of people support abortion rights and half of people don't support abortion rights. And the truth of that is so much more complicated, right? And the idea that there are people who have abortions and people who don't have abortions, right? And again, so much more complicated, right? Like I have children, I have also had an abortion, right? Like, and in fact, most people who have an abortion have given birth before, right? And so like they're a clinic provider um, whose name I've blanked on, unfortunately. He used to say there aren't people who have abortions and people who have babies. Those are just the same people at different points in their lives.
Mm.
And and the reality of what public opinion is actually, like I said, it's a lot more complicated. That by and large, people do support people being able to have access to the reproductive health care they need. And I was blown away by research that was done. This was, kind of a long time ago now, where you could ask people who said they were opposed to abortion, that absolutely not pro-choice, never would be. But when you ask them what if somebody they love needed to have an abortion, what would they like it to, what should that be like? And you were like, well, they shouldn't have to like go through protesters, and they should be able to access a doctor, and it should be in their community, and they should have, access to care. And it was like, they were sort of they were painting the strokes of what reproductive justice looks like. And that's even people who profess to be against abortion. And so I think, the myth, or the many myths that we have, come from looking at these issues in a vacuum and not really situating them in the reality of people's lives, and the realities that that may push people to not pursue pregnancy or to end a pregnancy when they would have wanted to, right? Like there are many people who would have preferred to remain pregnant, but conditions of poverty or, the conditions in their community are not such that they feel like they can continue a pregnancy to term. And that, that is like, I don't know, yeah, the complexity of people's lives and the way that they make decisions, the fact that so many times people make decisions about their pregnancies with others in mind also, right? The children they already have, their partner, other people that they have care responsibilities for. So it is certainly much more than just you know, pro or con, or people who have abortions, people who don't have abortions. It's really a broad spectrum of human experience, and I think that is our job, is to ensure that the law and legal structures really not just accommodate but support people in that broad range of human experience.
That last point that you said kind of moves me to my next question. What are ways what are ways that the legal community and legal education could support reproductive justice, or alternatively has not supported? What more needs to be done?
Yeah, I mean, I think the place where the legal community can start is really with education in law schools, and that was the why the organization was founded back in 2003. It was founded as Law Students for Choice, sort of as a law school counterpart to medical students for choice. And based on the idea that people were not getting trained in issues related to reproductive rights in law schools and really pushing for curricula that address these issues. Now, that has changed significantly in the intervening decades, right? Like we're in a very different situation now where people have more of an opportunity to engage with these issues. Um, but I think that it's possible that there's still work to be done in engaging these issues from a perspective that is interconnected. And I think I feel very fortunate to be in connection with a lot of academics who, are peers, and we were like coming into the work at the same time, so that it's more so the case that there's a holistic perspective. But also, I feel like I have to make a pitch for the CUNY Law School. I was fortunate. So part of the core curriculum, one of the classes is law and family relations. And I think, that to a 1L law student, that's a little bit opaque. Like, what do we mean by law and family relations? But I realized, so I was fortunate to have that class with Professor Angela Burton. And I realized eventually I was like, oh, this is a class basically that's on substantive due process. But when you really look at what we're learning, this is a class on reproductive justice, right? Like because we started with cases around people's ability to live together as a family, right? And like to be counted as a family, and cases about people's ability to decide who they were going to marry and whether they were going to carry pregnancies to term, and the variety of issues that were all reproductive justice concern. So the class wasn't called reproductive justice, but then like a first year canon class, a constitutional law class, and really it was a reproductive justice class. And I think that um, really, I think, colored my perspective. Like we weren't looking at these issues just sort of like, okay, now we're now we're in the due process clause or whatever. Like it was really like looking at this, like, what does it mean? What does it mean to be a person? What does it mean, to be a family? What does it mean to get to make these decisions? And how does the law address that? So I wish everybody had to take law and family relations.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that you've said earlier in the dignity in pregnancy loss is, aspects of loss and grief. And there's this way in which intimacy and intimate decisions are kind of regulated by the state, which I think the reproductive justice movement really brings forward in a way that other movements don't. So I wanted to just to sort of winding down um, for today, our conversation. It seems that the issue of reproductive justice sort of in the mainstream, right? Not between you and I, kind of ebbs and flows. And yet the moment, when I open the newspapers, I'm not really seeing, as much of a conversation on this that may have happened immediately post Dobbs, right? There's this sort of episodic aspect. Why do you think that's the case? Or do you agree that to be true? And why do you think that's the case that reproductive justice sort of sometimes comes into the national sort of like discourse, mainstream, and then sort of goes away right now. We're really focused on, and these are issues that we should be focusing on, right? Immigration,
Mhm.
economic justice, or the war. But it seems that the gender lens or reproductive justice doesn't always get sort of similar attention. So I was wondering if you
Mhm.
agreed, and if yes, what explains that?
Yeah, I think you are absolutely correct to identify that there is a sort of episodic nature of these issues being in the news or having public attention when you're referring to reproductive rights specifically. And so, when it comes to focus on reproductive rights, anytime there was a case that was coming before the Supreme Court, certainly there was sustained attention after the Dobbs decision, a lot of attention on the part of the media. And I think that that is a perfect encapsulation of the limits of just looking at something from a reproductive rights perspective, because that is so focused on courts and change in the law, that like that's just not always going to be the thing that is happening or that is like the at the top of people's minds.
Mm,
When we look at it from a reproductive justice perspective, though, it is always in the news, right? Like right now, like thinking about economic issues and the uncertainty that people have, right? Like that affects their ability to care for their families. It affects their decisions about whether they're going to carry pregnancies to term, right? Our country is dropping bombs on children and hospitals, right? Like that affects people's reproductive lives. Like this is, and so everything connects back to it, right? Or I think that a lot of people have a perception that it was like, okay, we were talking about repro and now we're talking only about immigration, as though people who are immigrants don't also, want to become pregnant, are pregnant, want to prevent pregnancy, are pregnant in detention centers, right? Like I think, one of the issues that has come up recently is that uh, minors who are pregnant are being shifted to facilities in Texas where they can't get abortion care. So if they wanted to, they wouldn't be able to because of where they're being put, right? So like it is always happening. You have to be looking for it, right? Like if reproductive justice is about this like fundamental aspect of the human condition, like our like embodied experiences. Those experiences don't ebb and flow or go away because of a political situation.
mm.
It is people adapting to these conditions that is, is not only pertinent but urgent, right? And to be looking at like how that affects their reproductive lives. So I think that means that it is our job as the advocates to say these things still always matter. Like, you're thinking about these issues, but like, separation of families, whether that is through the family policing system or through the immigration system, like that is about reproductive justice, like that, and like, our if one of the components is the ability to parent our children, so the children who are being taken from their parents or families who are being separated in detention, like this is a reproductive justice issue.
Thank you for that. I think making those connections more explicit, I think, is really important. Um, I wanted to we are, in Women's History Month. So I think this unique lens that you bring through reproductive justice, through gender justice, I was wondering if you can share what does that lens offer to other movements? I do think from my own experience in the labor field, oftentimes just as you mentioned, the sort of intimate sort of like relations, the gendered relations get kind of like additive. It's like after the fact. But it makes for a richer analysis, as you just did, in terms of immigration rights and the war, to have this lens. So maybe what might you share to activists and other face spaces who are not making these connections, as to why or what would be helpful maybe in their work, or what is brought through this lens?
Yeah, I mean, I think what this offers is an entry point for virtually any type of movement work that you're doing. The fact that our work is fundamentally about the fact that people have bodies that have needs that should be addressed, right? Like that provides an entry point. But I think that that's maybe it is important for movements, for any movement, to find ways to connect with pretty much anybody, right? And I think that's something that like I am certain that they are doing. But some things that I've that I've found personally moving in my career is, for instance, being at rallies outside the Supreme Court for around like, a reproductive rights case that's before the court. And seeing unions show up, like they have their shirts and their banners, and it's like, I think there's this question of like, why are unions here? And it's because workers get pregnant too, right? And like these things are all of these issues are relevant to our lives in so many ways. Like we can't count on our on being able to have civil rights if people who are immigrants are stripped of their civil rights, or if police can run rampant and you know and be killing people in the streets, right? Like this is all of our destinies are intertwined. And so we, for the sake of our movements, for the longevity of our movements, and just for the sake of meeting human need to be able to make those connections. You know, I think about like you know, people who are doing environmental work too. And like, and that, you know, that it connects to all of us because we all have to breathe the air, we all have to drink the water, and finding those points of intersection so that it's not just about you know, my rights, my choice, right? That sort of impoverished view that I think really like where movements or legal movements start sometimes. They need to grow and expand and be about like people's lived experiences. And that's how they persist and that's how they continue. And that's how, you know, you bring more people in to have your activism be about generations and not just be about rights that can be extinguished when the Supreme Court composition changes.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Just for today, the last question. I'm sure there's much more that we could talk about. Question I've asked every interviewee. You know, again, from your perspective, from your arc of your movement work, what does liberation look like to you, um, personally or within the context of reproductive justice or broader?
Yeah. Um, to me, liberation looks like us getting to live our lives outside the law. I think that there is an idea that the law should or can touch every aspect of our lives. And I don't believe in that. I think that, you know, there are, you know, what courts have called zones of privacy or just like those intimate spaces of you know, how who do we love? How do we form family? Who do we have around us through important points of passage, like giving birth or ending a pregnancy? How do we grieve our losses and you know, honor our dead and all, you know, these things are really about what it means to be a human being, right? Like this is how we self-determine our lives. And as interested as I am, and as dedicated as I am to making laws just and fair and supportive, I also don't think that the law has something to say about every aspect of our lives. And I think that it's important for us to remember that, especially in a country that is very attached to a complicated legal system. I think I've seen firsthand the ways that that legal system is turned against people and can be really harmful. And so, you know, the ability for us to live safely in community with others, I think is really that's what liberation looks like.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I have so much thoughts in my mind from all of what you shared. But for today, thank you again for your work, and your dedication and for sharing so much of your wisdom.
Yeah, my pleasure.